kindred friends, and welcome to the Radical Emergence podcast, where we're having conversations at the edge of transformation. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Jen Peer-Rich, and with me is my friend, co-host, and co-collaborator, Dr. Sally Adnams Jones. Please check out our bios in the show notes where you'll find links to our work, websites, and can find ways to connect with us. If you're not already following, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and join our mailing list so you can stay up to date on new episodes as they drop.
Hello, everybody. Sally here. This exciting project consists of about 26 episodes in all, dedicated to better defining and understanding transformation on all its levels of reality. That's personal, social, as well as ecological. We're going to ask, what is transformation? Why bother? Why do we need it? And what does it feel like or look like? We'll also ask, can we induce it or perhaps accidentally block it? These are really important questions for growth.
We draw not only on our hard-won life experience, we are also transdisciplinarians. So what the heck is that? Well, it means we want to understand transformation from as many lenses as possible, including formal academic disciplines and discourses, art, media, and popular culture. Importantly, we draw from our living experience.
So we are experts, so to speak, but mostly in just one small but highly critical area, our own suffering, and the medicines that we've both used to transform our own lives. So to this end, we've also added decades of committed practices, as well as formal degrees, including specific in-depth studies in the mechanisms of transformation, because we needed to understand this healing journey for ourselves.
Does this entitle us to help others? You bet. Absolutely. Because it is by sharing our stories, knowledge, and direct experience that we offer sane, sober, practical tools for living on the ground of life. So welcome. Strap in, hang on, and enjoy the ride as we deep dive into a universe of transformation.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm just so enjoying having these conversations with Jen and sharing this with you. And I hope you're coming along with us and finding this truly helpful. And just to remind you, if you have any questions or inspirations you want to share, do get hold of us, and we'd be more than happy to include you and your questions. So today, we have a really, really close to our heart topic. It's an aspect of our ongoing conversations on what is transformation. And it's my personal favorite, and the one that I've devoted my entire professional life to understanding. So let's dive into this. It's on creativity. This is a very complex word and has a whole division of academia dedicated to understanding it. And much of the conclusions are that it can't be measured and quantified. So even though there's a whole bunch of professors out there analyzing and measuring and trying to talk about creativity, actually experiencing the subjective creative act is almost a mystery. And so Jen and I are going to do the impossible and try and talk about that today. And I'll say why. This topic it's a linchpin in our conversation, because creativity is an innate characteristic quality and mechanism of the universe. And it is transformative. And not only that, transformation itself is creative. So the two, creativity and transformation, are hand in hand, and we want to just unpack that a little bit today. So here we are in a human body, and we ourselves are a fractal of that creative universe. So we have this amazing instrument that we can learn how to activate and become part of that emergence itself, which we've discussed over many episodes, is the nature of the universe. It's emergent, it's creative, it's transformative, and so are we. So this is the amazing reality that we wake up to, this creative body. We have two hands that we can use, we can hold tools, we can shape the manifestation around us, we can plant, we can dig, we can build, we can construct. We have a binary brain. One part focuses on convergent thinking and the other divergent thinking. In other words, the imagination and the execution. We've spoken about that. Creativity has to use both of those. So here we are in this body that can create, procreate, and co-create. So this body can produce babies, it can produce ideas, it can problem solve, it can manifest more and more truth, goodness, and beauty. It's imaginal, it can envision the future and bring that into being. When you actually understand the powers of this body and start to practice and execute them, your life will never be the same again. So what is creativity? It's the use of the imagination for manifesting change. So that's quite a profound statement. We have these two parts of the brain. And this is a reductive way to talk about it, but it's just easier if you're not a neuroscientist, which none of us are here. Jen and I are not neuroscientists. We don't go cutting up brains, but we read a lot about that. And so just for the ease of language, we're going to just use the right brain as a symbol of all that is imaginal and intuitive and open and curious and receptive to what wants to come through it, whether that's from the subconscious, whether that's from culture, whether that's from a download from somewhere that we can't even explain. And we have this lovely left brain, which then can take that and execute it into some beautiful problem solving or product that can then transmit the change into culture. So we can build bridges, we can create sculptures, we can write books, we can choreograph dances. So we are able to use this body to bring the future into the present moment. We call that culture. We make cultural objects. And so we're always participating at that edge of the imagination as we bring down the future and execute the future through the body into the present moment. And so we're going to talk about why that creative act is so empowering. It actually transforms you as you do it. And it transforms your culture, it transforms other people, and it transforms the future for the whole of mankind. There's not one product in this world that didn't come through a human body that was using both its divergent and convergent thinking for the betterment of humanity. So even though creativity itself is not highly valued in schools, they talk about STEM, science, math, English, the things that you can measure, those are given value a lot. And the creative act itself is dismissed in many ways. The art area of the school is ghettoized at the back of the building. It's never given any money or benefits, and troubled kids are sent down the dark hallway to the art room. Can you do something with this kid? Well, those kids are the creative kids. And so I've spent time down that ghettoized passage and welcoming those kids into my room and helping them expand and explore their power, their voice, their agency, their imagination. And while doing that, I began to notice that these kids were also healing their trauma. And we'll talk about that today as well. So I'm going to just say that I moved from art education into art therapy because I noticed all these extra qualities and the healings that were going on as kids in the classroom were creating. So I'm very partial to these kids who are often demonized for being very, very independent, for being very unique, for being risk takers, for being open and curious and experimental, because I see the value in these qualities that are otherwise not able to be given grades. So the creative kids were often thought of as troublesome because they don't fit into neat linear grading systems. Linear, neat teachers don't know how to stimulate them. And the marketplace itself wants to financially reward kids who are linear, well-behaved, logical, and left brain. So those are the ones that are told, go be a doctor, go be a lawyer, go do the things that are powerful engineers. So the creatives slowly get dismissed, and they were my favorites. I just wanted to nurture that possibility in them for creating our future. So, and then slowly I became interested in the therapeutic and amazing mechanisms for healing trauma that creative acts can also do. So to sum up, before I hand it back to Jen, I see the creative act as a birthing moment. So whether we use text, image, gesture, rhythm, all the ways that we can express through the body, there's multiple languages that we can use symbolically to express our interior life. These are moments of great power, great healing, communication, beauty, connection, imagination, literally all the things that make life worth living, and they come through the human body. So I've specialized in helping people do that, whether that's through education or therapy, and I'm still devoted to it. So here we are, Jen and I, introducing why creativity is so vital for our future as of mankind. So Jen, over to you, my dear friend, for you to share with us why you think it's so important.
It's so good to be here with you. I have been really excited about this episode because of your pioneering work in creative transformation. And as I was listening to you talk, I just wonder if for any educators who are listening to the show, if you have any thoughts on maybe a simple thing or two that educators can do to nurture the creative potential in their students. I know you're a wellspring of knowledge about that, so I just wonder if you wouldn't mind just sharing that quickly before we go forward.
Yeah, so I was going to share my book with people. I know it's backwards on the screen, but you can see the picture and it's available on Amazon. It's called Art Making with Refugees and Survivors of Global Disaster. And these are creative and transformative responses to trauma. So if you want to know more about that, this is available and has been recommended to all art teachers across the United States by their professional body for helping kids in the classroom specifically, because not only do refugees have ACEs, as we call them, adverse childhood experiences, which I'm going to talk about next, but the book outlines the criteria for facilitating creative experiences. And the first one that we should mention, and then I'll give it back to you, Jen, is safety, stability, and security. And that is because we need to find our parasympathetic nervous system, which we've discussed in other episodes, and we also need to come into theta brainwaves. Those are the most creative imaginal. So when there is safety and security in the container, the kids feel supported. And I'm talking about adults too, refugees. I've worked with refugees. I've worked with highly traumatized groups of people in Canada and in Africa. And I'll talk about the book just now because I collected stories from around the world, from refugee camps and survivors of tsunami and earthquake, and they delineated certain things they needed, and those are in the book. So I'm not going to take up more time of that, Jen, but I want to give it back to you now.
Your work is just so radical, and it's the medicine we need. It's the medicine we need because what you're doing and what we're doing in this show is we are lifting creativity and imagination back to its rightful place in the world. You know, as you say, it's so discredited and pathologized even to be creative. And that's such a disservice to us as a species, as humans with a natural proclivity for creating things, making things. So to have this side of us that's so innate be denied is a kind of trauma that happens to us as a species. So I'm so grateful for you and your work. And I'm really excited to go deeper into, transformation and creativity, because both are about generating something new, something different, right? And as Sally was saying, there is a symbiotic, reciprocal relationship between creativity and transformation, because creativity is about generating new solutions, new expressions, generating new ideas, and transformation is about change, right? It's about changing from one form to another. And that new form is often a creative solution or creative expression or a creative idea. So creativity and transformation are, you could think of them as like best friends. They frequently hang out together, they bring out the best in each other, and they grow together. And, you know, when I'm being creative, I'm an artist and in a variety of mediums. And when I'm being creative, either intentionally trying to make something or even unintentionally, just creativity is coming through me, I'm transforming all kinds of things, right? I'm transforming mediums, paint into a painting, but also I'm transforming things that are not tangible. And sometimes I'm transforming something that can't be held, like a thought or an idea or a feeling, and I'm creating a new form, right? So sometimes creativity is expressed in a tangible form, like a visible or auditory form, like making art or composing a piece of music or writing a song. But the creative force is also expressed in non-tangible states, from one state to another state, right? From one idea to a new idea. or from one state of consciousness to another state of consciousness. And a great example of this is creative healing. So I have a history, and I've talked about this before in previous interviews and in this podcast, that I have a history of a lot of self-sabotage and self-hatred and self-harm, that those patterns were a part of me since childhood. And those patterns arose out of the deep trauma that I experienced as an infant and as a child. And I spent years of my life trying to find my way to self-love and self-acceptance. And one of the ways that I heal that pattern of self-abuse is that when I have a self-critical thought, I replace that thought with a more positive, kind, and compassionate thought, right? And that act of replacing one thought with another thought is an act of creative transformation, right? It's the transformation from one state of mind to another state of mind. And that isn't something that creation isn't something that I can even see or hold, but it's very real nonetheless. As Sally is pointing to, this is why the imaginal realm is so important and vital to healing, right? In tapping into that, because I need to be able to participate with my own creative healing. Oftentimes that is happening not in something that I'm creating in the world, but I'm creating within me, right? So bringing that transformative attention heals the pattern of self-harm, and that itself is a deeply creative process. One of my favorite artists is Alex Gray, and he says, "Be an artist of consciousness. Your picture of reality is your most important creation. Make it powerfully, profoundly beautiful." And I love that. Another thing I want to point to before I turn it back to Sally is that, creativity really requires being comfortable with uncertainty, right? You have to let go of certainty and be willing to explore the unknown. A famous quote by Henri Matisse is that creativity takes courage, and it really does. Because, if you're an artist, that something important yet very mysterious dwells in the unknown. And our job as artists is to reach into that unknown, reach into the mystery, and bring forth something new. And that act itself is an act of creative transformation. It's courageous creative transformation. And I'm going to end here with a quote from Alan Alda, who's a great actor and famous from the TV show MASH. And he said, the creative is the place where no one else has ever been. You have to leave the city of your comfort and go into the wilderness of your intuition. And what you'll discover will be wonderful. What you'll discover is yourself. I love that. All right, Sally, I'm really looking forward to going deeper with you.
Yeah, Jen, I love this reference you just made to the courage it takes to be creative. It's so much easier to be inert, to avoid one's subjective experience, to not look at one's interior. And it takes resilience and courage. And this is one of the aspects of the creative act that is built within you the more you do it. So like you, Jen, I have experienced multiple different traumas of my life. And how I came to this was that each time when I turned towards creativity, I found my healing. It's quite remarkable. And we are going to look at trauma in another episode. So we won't go into that too much, but I would like to share with the listeners what the ACEs are, the early childhood adverse experiences that are now itemized, because the stats are that 61% of all adults have experienced ACE, one of the 10 ACEs. And many of those who are in the 61% have had at least 4 of the 10. So all the adults walking out around there, supposedly healthy, have some history of the trauma in them. And those are, some of you sadly might recognize some of these: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, mental illness in the family, divorce or incarceration, or substance abuse. So in this day and age, with 50% of marriages ending in divorce, many of the kids who come into our classrooms and many of the adults that we work with have experienced a lot of trauma. So we're all becoming more trauma informed. And so art therapy is a new pioneering field, really trying to address this. So in a way, it takes adults back to their childhood in some way, because it encourages a bit of playfulness. It encourages relaxing into being able to take new risks and experiment. It encourages adults to find inspiration within themselves, find the agency to actually execute change in their lives. And so and find their voices, find their story. Most of us won't even know that we've got a couple of aces until we start looking at our childhood. Then we start finding the story. Then we can actually express that in some art form. And then we've externalized the story and the pain and the trauma, and we can look at it. We've turned the subjective into the objective, and we can discourse with that and hang it up on the wall. And for several years, that piece will talk to us about the experience, and slowly we heal from it. So there's remarkable healing in externalizing your story into something beautiful, which is the work I've done with a lot of traumatized populations. So what I'm going to do is just read from my book briefly. These are the things that can be restored when you make art, even as a grown-up, when we stop thinking of art making as childish. And these are points that I've gathered from leaders in the field. I went and gathered stories from across the world from people who'd been doing this work for decades. So they had been working with traumatized populations, survivors in refugee camps, poverty, violence, crime, genocide, tsunami, earthquake. And this is their wisdom that I put into a book. So these are the things they have noticed with adult populations dealing with trauma when they provide creative projects for them. These are the things that are restored. A sense of playfulness can be stimulated in the very adult world of violence and pain. Possibilities return for innocence. There's a return to the pre-traumatic, pre-hypervigilant state of physiology, in other words, self-soothing. A gentle focus can return instead of that violent, hypervigilant fear. So bodies can actually soften and open again, and the eyes can soften and take in a wider gaze. The imagination can be released and revitalized. Joy can return, however temporarily, through colorful acts of celebration and rebalancing of the neurochemistry. Purpose can be restored. And the full brain can come back into action as opposed to the hypervigilant problem-solving left brain. Community and collaboration, social bonding, old memories can be replaced with envisioning new futures. Needs and issues can be noticed and met. New perspectives can be taken on. And most importantly, and we're going to dedicate a whole episode to this, people find their agency and their voice to tell their story, which is empowering. So there's not one negative thing that happens when you decide to dedicate some of your time to creative acts. And Jen, I know you've done this yourself, as I did with my own healing, and I want to hear more about why you think it's important to do this.
I love how you are reminding us since the beginning of when you started talking about safety and how intrinsic creating that cocoon of safety is to the creative process, and how that it has a clear connection to the trauma that a lot of us experienced as young people when our world became unsafe. And the healing of that is a recreating of that safe place so that the creative spark can arise and work that healing magic that you and I have both been so blessed to have experienced again and again in our lives. So I think really impressing on the importance of safety is important. Yeah. So I want to give a story about how creative transformation has looked in my life. I have spoken about before that I had a breakdown over a decade ago, and it was over a summer, and it was in my backyard. And through that awakening, I awakened to a whole new sense of self. And so much of my life up until that summer had been spent tending to the energy of my trauma, managing my trauma, believing in every story in my mind, believing that every thought was true and real and really me. And that work is a full-time job. It is exhausting. All of our creative energy goes into maintaining that chaos that we're living in inside of our mind. So when I had that breakdown and I went deeply into myself using self-inquiry with the help of trees who were teaching me how to be present, and I was retrieving these wounded parts of myself and bringing them with me into the present moment to live with me now. Suddenly, as I had this awakening, all of that energy that I had spent for all those decades tending to my wounds, all that energy was suddenly freed up and was full of potential. And I started at the end of that summer creating, not from a sense of who I believed myself to be anymore, not from the place of my mind. I started creating from the stillness and place of being, as I was understanding myself for the first time. And what that looked like for me was a lot of writing, chaotic writing, just like pouring out of me. And also a lot of art making. I created over 100 digital self-portraits where I portrayed myself in a variety of forms, such as my face imposed with various patterns of weather, different people, my face juxtaposed with different people. I did archetypes, I did personality disorders, animals. And what I was trying to express with this project was the oneness that I was feeling with all of life. And I was trying to express that creatively. And in a lot of ways, it was very compulsive. I mean, it felt like expressing that was the only thing that mattered to me. And I became really focused on articulating that oneness that I was experiencing using a creative medium. And I was totally swept up in that project until it was done. And when it was done, I knew it was done. And I never went back and did a project exactly like that. So when that stopper, the cork, was uncorked from my creative potential, I was able to flow creatively in really dynamic ways. And everything that I'm doing now, even this podcast, over a decade since that experience, is a byproduct of that great release of energy, the release of a lifetime of dedicated energy that has now become my deepest, greatest creative potential, that is now free to play, like Sally's talking about, because I've created that sense of safety within myself. And now it's flowing. And it makes me think about how many of us are out here dealing with our unresolved trauma, and our resources are going to managing that trauma. And that's our full-time job. And through healing that trauma, how much creative potential we can release into the world. And maybe that's what's happening right now with the movement of increased writing, sharing our stories, the popularity of memoir, maybe using our various creative mediums is happening more because we are sharing that healing. Maybe collectively that cork is being released and our creative potential is now flowing out into the world. And to me, that's a really exciting example of how creativity and transformation are always working together. Like I said, creativity and transformation are definitely besties. Shoot it back to you, Sally.
Yeah, there's so much in what you said there, Jen. I want to pick up on a couple of the really important things you said. Number one, how trauma blocks our flow. So we've got a whole episode coming up on that. So look out for that, listeners. It's super important, because until we've identified the trauma and started unblocking it, our flow is literally blocked. And that's when we can get anxiety, depression, all sorts of manifestations of neurosis, because our flow is blocked. So as Jen said, part of that was opening up her blockages and just allowing whatever was there to come out. And that's part of the healing. So that we're always creating space for the new. Otherwise we get very blocked, and nothing new can come through us. The other thing I loved that you said, Jen, was about trees and their healing. So I want to share a story with the listeners about how healing trees can be. In my neck of the woods, I live on Vancouver Island in Canada on the west coast, just north of Seattle, for anyone who's geographically minded. And we have beautiful indigenous culture all around us. So their practice is, their cultural practices is to acknowledge the trees. So the trees can be used for building longhouses, for carving totem poles, welcome figures to the village, canoes. The bark is used for clothing and hats and shelter and food, and all the privileges that just come from trees are part of the cultural practice. So I was deeply privileged to explore cultural practices with an amazing human called Simon Charlie. In the Coast Salish language, it's Hunametsi. Hunametsi was a cultural totem pole carver and mask maker here on Vancouver Island. He passed in 2005. He was awarded the Order of British Columbia and the Order of Canada for his cultural revival of these practices, because he knew how healing this was for his young men. In particular, wood is generally a man's medium, but for some reason, I think it was part of my destiny, as a white woman, I was allowed to apprentice with Hunametsi Simon for a year. So this was my deep exposure to how integrating, Jen, you were talking about how parts of you are healed and come together into a unity, how the creative act unifies disparate, broken parts of ourselves into this whole healed, agentic, powerful human. So we had 10 young men, all of whom had all the aces that I've mentioned, many of whom had been incarcerated a couple of times for crime due to poverty and from family abuse, and some had fetal alcohol syndrome. And these humans, I got the privilege of sharing totem pole carving and mask making for a year. So that episode is a chapter in my book on how colonization of cultures is deeply traumatizing, how that results in all the aces over time, including alcohol abuse and incarceration, and how this practice was used to heal many, many young men, to help them find hope, purpose, agency, dignity, empowerment, pride, and how that year of carving a tree into a beautiful form that healed the wound and told the story in images vertically. It's actually it's a storytelling pole, how externalizing that pain and story into this incredibly beautiful object, which was then initiated with sacred ritual, with ceremony, with feasting. The village celebrated together these young men and their accomplishments. I feel quite touched. The healing was in their being seen and heard, in their beauty and dignity and strength by the community. And the community celebrating in this beautiful object that was then taken back to their separate villages and installed as a storytelling piece. There's no end to the empowerment through the creative act. And I've had the privilege of working with different communities with different traumas, including apartheid in South Africa, or colonization here in Canada, or refugees, or even school kids with ACEs. It doesn't matter in the end which trauma. It's the, as you said, Jen, the unblocking of that gift and the restoration of pride, dignity, beauty, and joy that is the healing process. Because we are fractal emergence of the universe, and the universe just wants to go ahead and create and new forms and beauty. And we just have to look at nature and all the gorgeousness of what the universe creates. We're part of that, and we get to do that as well once we've recognized that this body is an instrument for emergence, and trauma shuts that down, as does what I would call left brain chauvinism, those powerful people in the universe who try to diminish the creative act as negligible. They dismiss it as childish. Men are called feminine if they do it. Women are called masculine if they do it. So ignoring all those voices and going ahead and finding our creative gift is the most empowering thing all of us can do. And that's why we've devoted a whole couple of episodes to this. So thanks for listening to my story. It changed my life. It transformed me, transformed everybody in that group. The poles themselves go on to transform their communities. And so there's this ripple effect from bringing forth your gift. Going to hand it back to you, Jen, and say goodbye to our listeners for this week.
Here we are at this sweet spot that we keep hitting in this podcast, which is the intersection between the personal, sociocultural, ecological, the universal, the transpersonal, and all these points, these levels of reality are operating within us in this dynamic way, and how transformation and creativity are playing at all of these intersections in just magnificent ways, and how it's a miracle to have a conscious awareness, to be able to even talk about this and have an awareness of how we are transformative beings within a field of transformation who are always transforming and being transformed. It's wild. It's just really wild to explore this with you and do it in a way that is not wrapped up in, heavy jargon, just really simple and easy understandings that everybody can appreciate because we're experiencing it every day of our ordinary lives. So I want to end this episode talking about something a woman, beloved teacher named Gabrielle Roth, who is an American dancer and also the creator of 5 Rhythms. It's a movement and meditation practice. She's very well known in ecstatic dancing circles. And she says, in many shamanic societies, if you come to a medicine person complaining of being disheartened, dispirited, or depressed, they would ask you one of 4 questions. And so I'm going to leave you all listening with these 4 questions, and we hope that you will think about them, digest them, and give us some feedback if you have some thoughts on how you are engaging with creativity in your own life. Okay, here's the questions. When did you stop dancing? When did you stop singing? When did you stop being enchanted by stories? When did you stop finding comfort in the sweet territory of silence? And we will leave you with that. We will look forward to seeing you next time on our next episode. We are moving right along, almost to a midway point of the Radical Emergence podcast. It is a joy and honor and privilege to spend time with you and have your attention. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
So thanks for joining us. And we hope you can take away some helpful tools, perhaps some great stories, and some wisdom for your own ongoing journey.
Join us for our next episode where we will deep dive again into a universe of transformation.